Let me ask you something. If someone takes away your umbrella while it's raining and then congratulates themselves for making you stronger, would you call that empowerment? I hope not. In the labor law reform case, our dearest government has given us our umbrella back, but it is filled with loopholes. Today we are talking about India's new labor codes, marketed as historic reform, celebrated as worker empowerment, but condemned by trade union as historic betrayal. So who is lying? Who is exaggerating? And most importantly, what does the law actually do? Let's strip away the speeches, the slogan, the chest thumping patriotism, and read the law like lawyers. On 21st November, the Modi government implemented our new labor codes, claiming they were progressive, simplifying compliance, empowering workers. The Prime Minister himself celebrated it, but on the streets, trade unions burned copies of the codes. The CPIM said 29 hard-won labor laws dismantled. Even industrialists, not exactly Marxist fan club, said this will increase operating costs. So here's the true picture. When workers are angry and employers are uneasy, someone is clearly not telling us the full story. Let's find it in the details. India loves reforms. We announce them with drum rolls, hashtags, and confidence. But reforms like arranged marriage look very different once you move in together. We are talking about the Labor Law Codes Reform 2025. Is it progress? Is it paperwork? Or is it policy? That sounds humane but behaves differently on the ground. Stay with me because this affects people you see every day and probably yourself. The government says this is alignment, global standards, social justice, a modern labor ecosystem. 29 law folded into four neat codes effective November 2025. It sounds efficient, it sounds decisive, it sounds like a house finally decluttered. Fewer laws, cleaner files, faster governance. From the state points of view, this is reform with a capital R. Workers didn't ask for elegance, they asked for enforcement. They asked for expansion into unorganized sector. They asked for penalties that hurt employers, not headlines that hurt workers. Instead, the critic says these codes legalize exploitations, dressed up precarity as flexibility and self-subordination as freedom. It is reform that looks progressive in English but feels familiar in practice. Also, whenever the law says all workers, my instinct is to check who quietly slipped out the back door, because in India, all is a generous word. It often means those who are invisible, documented, and easy to count. Everyone else exists in footnotes, if at all. So, when the courts promise coverage for workers, we must ask who is included by design and who by assumption. Let's ground this discussion in numbers, not optimism. Over 90% of India's workforce is unorganized. That's street vendors, agriculture laborers, construction workers, domestic help, roughly 40 to 45 crore people. The organized sector, public and private combined, employs barely 8 to 10%. Most new jobs created are informal. So when laws are written with organized workplace in mind, they are automatically speaking to a minority. Before I continue, if this surprised you, please like the video, and if it didn't, comment why. The public sector employs 6 to 8%, stable salaries, pensions, paper trails. The formal private sector employs another 6%, contracts, HR departments, emails. The rest, everyone else, works without certainty, no fixed hours, no guaranteed income, no formal grievance system. So the question is, who will be impacted? These reforms will technically impact everyone, but practically they will impact people differently. For the organized sectors, the changes may feel procedural. For unorganized workers, the changes are existential. The rich employers negotiate flexibility, the poor workers absorb risk. Law doesn't fall equally here, it lands where gravity is weakest. Here is where the fine print starts doing heavy lifting. Many provisions apply only above certain size threshold, which sounds technical but effectively excludes the vast organized sectors where most Indians actually work. When protection begins only after a head count, vulnerability becomes invisible by design. I have to repeat this line here, guys. When protection begins only after a head count, vulnerability becomes invisible by design. The OSHWC code exempts units, the fewer than 20 or 40 workers depending on power usage from several requirements including factory registration, social benefits linked to establishment size leave out millions of workers in small units or home-based works. Since India's labor force overwhelmingly works in small establishments, these exemptions don't trim edges. They cut out the center. Organized sectors protection apply to maybe 10%. The remaining 90% now face even fewer safeguards than before. The promise of expanded coverage begins to look illusory. If this counterintuitive, do comment, like, subscribe this channel for more detailed explanations. Not everything is bad. Earlier appointments letters were optional, now they are mandatory. Written proof of employment brings to transparency. It promises job security, fixed terms. A paper trail where earlier there was only trust on paper, this is dignity translated into documents. Under the Code on Social Security, coverage is extended to all workers, including gig and platform workers. PF, ESIC, insurance, minimum wages now become a statutory right for all workers, not just scheduled payments. Timely payment is mandated. Financial security is the stated goal. Preventive healthcare enters the statute book. Free annual health checkups for workers above 40. Workers are permitted to work at night and across all occupations, subject to consent and safety measures. ESIC coverage expands pan-India. Compliance is simplified into single registration, single license, single returns, and from the government's lens, this is inclusion plus efficiency, rights with reduced red tape. Earlier, the law treated women like porcelain dolls, strong in theory, fragile in practice. Night shifts, no. Certain jobs, also no. The intention was safety, but the result was exclusion. The new courts flip the script and say if a woman consents and safety exists, she can work anywhere, anytime. Sounds empowering, right? But here's the catch. What does true consent means? Especially when the rent is due, and who checks if the safety measures are real or just limited posters on a wall? Freedom without without enforcement is actually just a worded illusion. The door is open, but will it stay safe once she walks in? Fixed term employments now get equal benefits, equal pay, even gratuity after 1 year. Sounded just like the finally locking. But the job itself comes with an expiry date. Benefits without security are like health insurance without a hospital. When a renewal depends on pleasing the boss, how loudly can you complain? Equality on paper is comforting. In practice, security still runs the show. Can dignity survive when your job ends every 6 months? For years, gig workers were legally invisible. Now the law says we see you. The progress platforms will even contribute is 1 to 2% of turnover to a welfare fund. Applause, maybe a polite clap, because workers are still not employees. No minimum wage, no job security, no right to unionize. Recognition without right is being invited to a dinner but not allowed to eat. Symbolism is not protection. No notice, no explanation. The principal employer looks responsible but only from a distance. Layers of contracts keeps the hands clean. Protection exists but does not belong. And in labor law, belonging is power. Without it, benefits feels temporary, like borrowed furniture in a rented house. The codes create three types of workers in one workplace. Permanent fixed term contract. Same work, different rights, different fears. Unity becomes difficult when survival is unequal. Automatic absorption sounds comforting until you realize it applies only especially if the contractors forgets to renew a license. Employers won't forget. They never do. The insecurity isn't accidental here, it is designed, and a divided workforce is a quiet workforce. Under the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2020, the law introduces something that sounds very work friendly: automatic absorption of contract workers. What does this mean? If a contract worker is hired through a contractor who does not have a valid license, that worker is supposed to be automatically absorbed by the principal employers. In theory, this turns an illegal arrangement into a permanent job. It also promises that contract workers should receive benefits equal to permanent employees. Now, this sounds protective, almost generous, but the protection workers only in one in narrow situation. When the contractors is unlicensed, in reality this create a strange incentives. Employers now have every reason to ensure contractors are perfectly licensed. Once the contractor is licensed, the automatic absorption clause disappears completely. So the protection exists only as a punishment for paperwork failure, not as a real labor law right. Next comes the promise of equal benefits. Yes, the code says that the contract worker should receive benefits similar to permanent staff. But here's the catch: contract workers can be terminated at any time simply by ending the contract with the contractor. No disciplinary process, no job security, no notice protection like permanent workers. So, what does equality mean when employment itself is temporary? The result is a fragmented workforce inside the same establishment. A small group of permanent workers enjoy large job security. A larger group of fixed term workers survives on renewal contracts, and a massive base of contract workers lives with constant uncertainty. All three groups often do the same work on the same shop floor under the same employer, yet live under completely different conditions. The fragmentation weakens worker solidarity. It divides bargaining power, and ultimately it creates a silent race to the bottom in wages, security, and dignity. The law appears neutral. The structure, however, quietly institutionalizes inequality. Youth worker. Youth is energy, not free labor. Minimum wages are now non negotiable. No more experience paid in exposure. Appointment letters are mandatory. Finally, proof that you exist. Employment history becomes real, not imaginary. Leave without losing wages. What a radical idea. Exploitation is officially out of fashion. Floor wages promises dignity, not survival mode. So, a job should build a future, not anxiety. Should fairness really feel revolutionary? This is the main question here. MSME workers. Small businesses, big responsibility. MSME workers now fall under social security. Minimum wages are not optional kindness. Basic facilities, water, rest, canteens are not luxuries. Work hours get boundaries, not excuses. Overtime finally pays double, not in gratitude. Paid leaves joins the real world. Timely wages means fewer next week pakka. Productivity grows when people breathe. So the question here is, can growth exist without workers' well-being? BD and cigar workers, rolling livelihood, not rolling exploitation. Minimum wages are guaranteed at last hours. Work hours capped, lung deserved limits too. 48 hours a week minimum means danger underground, protection above ground. Same commuting accidents now count as work related. Safety standards get national uniformity. Health is policy, not luck. Annual health checkups free and mandatory. Working hours finally respected biology. 8 to 12 hours, not endless shifts. 48 hours a week for balance. Work balance shouldn't be a surface privilege. And the question here is safety a negotiable in risky jobs? Hazardous industry workers. If the job risk, the rules must be strict. Annual health checkups for every workers. Safety standards go national, not optional. Women can work everywhere, yes, even underground. Equality doesn't stop at danger safe zones. Safety committees becomes compulsory. On-site monitoring replaces afterthoughts. Hazardous chemicals handled responsibly. protection becomes practice, not paperwork. And the question here is, isn't safety the bare minimum? Textile workers, threats may travel, rights should not. Migrants workers now get equal wages, no discount for distance or displacement. Welfare benefits follow the workers, not the factory. PDS portability means food doesn't stop at borders. Pending dues can be claimed for 3 years. Justice gets a longer memory. Overtime finally pays double, not in promise. Question here is, should migrant ever means fewer rights? Your salary now has a deadline, that is the 7th of every month, because rent doesn't understand processing. Equal pay for equal work becomes mandatory. Talent, not gender, gets the paycheck. Women can work night shift by choice with safety. Opportunity should never comes with barriers. Harassment and wages disputes are get faster. Silence is no longer policy. Appointment letters and social security are compulsory. And the question here is, isn't predictability the real workplace perk? Dock workers, all dock workers to get formal recognition, legal protection, mandatory appointment letters to guarantee social security benefits, provident funds, pensions and insurance benefits ensured for all, whether contract or temporary workers. Employers funded annual health checkups are mandatory. Dock workers to get mandatory medical facilities, first aid, sanitary and washing areas, etc. to ensure decent work conditions and safety for both the genders. Export sector workers. Export sector workers, fixed term workers to receive gratuity fund, provident fund and other social security benefits. Women to be allowed to work in night shift with consent, ensuring opportunity to earn a higher income, and the consent has to become from the women only. And safety and welfare measures including mandatory written consent, double wages for overtime, safe transportation, CCTV surveillance and security arrangements. Beyond the major welfare initiatives already highlighted, the Labour Codes introduces several further reforms that strengthens workers' protection and simplify compliances for employers. National floor wage, gender neutral pay and job opportunities, inspector cum facilitator system. This has a huge loophole, guys. Faster and predictable disputed resolution, single registration, single license and single return, national OSH board, mandatory safety committee in establishment with 500 plus workers, higher factory applicability limits. Shifting from multiple acts to consolidated codes is not a cosmetic makeover, it is a full blown structural surgery. By merging 29 diverse labor laws into a handful of codes, Parliament was not merely simplifying the law, it has quietly handed over significant law making power to the executive both at the union and the state levels. Matters that once sat firmly inside the text of legislation, such as how a floor wage is calculated, where safety limits are drawn, or where who qualifies for social security, have now been relocated to rules. And rules, like unlike acts, can be changed through simple government notification without the noise, debate or discomfort of immediate parliamentary scrutiny. Efficiency may be the selling point, but the real question is, when the hard law becomes soft, who gets the flexibility, who pays the price? The notification signals a clear philosophical turn by the Indian states from this comforting paternal protector to the brisk efficiency obsessed facilitator. In the year after 1947, labor law jurisprudence was built on a simple but honest assumption. Capital and labor do not meet on equal terms. Laws like the Industrial Dispute Act 1947 and the Factories Act 1948 treated this imbalance seriously. The state stepped into a secure tenure, regulate retrenchment, mandate welfare, and restrain the arbitrary power of capital. Then came 1991 liberalization and the new vocabulary. Suddenly, labor protection was labeled rigidity. International institutions like IMF and World Bank argue that the Indian labor laws, especially those governing retrenchment and exclusion, were scaring away investment. This This thinking was formally endorsed by the Second National Commission on Labor in 1999, which recommended rationalizing labor laws, a polite way of saying make hiring and firing easier, while parking worker welfare for the unorganized sector in a separate, softer framework. The present labor codes faithfully execute this blueprint. They embed the belief that the labor rights must bend to market demands, not challenge them, thereby rewriting the social contracts between the worker, the employer, and the state quietly, efficiently, and with the remarkable confidence. The court cheerfully followed four older laws, including the Minimum Wage Act 1948, the Payment Bonus Act 1965, promising simplicity while quietly introducing uncertainty. Its most slippery feature is the idea of floor wage. The union government is empowered to fix a national floor below which states cannot go. But the code carefully avoids tying the wage to the nutritional and consumptional standards laid down by the Supreme Court in Raptoka's Bread case 1992. The result is the discretion without doctrine. Critics worry that this flexibility could normalize poverty wages in turning what should have been a constitutional promise of a living wage into a polite endorsement of survival level pay. The structural changes go further from Section 2Y introduces a uniform definition of wages, placing a 50% cap on allowances such as HRA and convenience. Any excess is automatically folded into the basic wage for calculating provident fund and gratuity. On paper, this looks like social security expansion. In reality, it often shrinks the employee's monthly take-home salary. The worker saves more for a distant future while struggling a little harder in the present. A trade off the law makes without asking for consent. Administratively, the transformation is almost symbolic. Section 51 replaces the old school labor inspector with a little that sounds less like authority and more like customer service. Enforcement gives a way to advise physical inspections yield to web-based and randomized checks. Violations can now be compounded, meaning employers can pay a prescribed fee and walk away without prosecution. Critics argue that this converts wages theft from a punishable offense into a negotiable expense, neatly rebranded as illegality as just another line item in the cost of doing business. What exactly the PF thing is? For example, just imagine what how exactly now our salaries are going to be divided. This is an example of it. For example, you earn 100 chocolates every month and your boss gives them to you in two boxes. Your main box is going to be your basic wage now onwards, and your side boxes is going to be your HRA, travel money, and other allowances. Earlier, your boss was doing a trick. He was putting a few chocolates in the main box, that is your basic wage, and he was putting all the chocolates into the side wages. So your CTC was higher, but that's what he was doing. Why? Because PF and gratuity are counted from the main box. Now, what exactly he now, according to the law, that is the section 2Y, what he has to do now, at least 50 chocolates must be in the main box. That is, a 50% of your CTC has to be required to be in the main box. That is going to be your PF and ESIC. So your future will be safe, but your CTC is going to be a little less at this point of the time. And that is the reason the companies are saying that operational costs are going to be higher, because people are going to go for those companies which are going them higher CTCs. So that is something that is going to happen nowadays. Read this. So this is what the law is saying at the moment. Save more for later, even if you get to spend a little less now. By merging the Trade Unions Act 1926 and the Industrial Disputes Act 1947, this code does not merely streamline dispute resolution, It rewrites the grammar of job security itself. The most controversial change lies in the expanded permission for what is politely called hire and fire. Earlier, any establishment employing 100 or more workers needed prior government approval to retrench employees or shut down operations. Chapter 10th now lifts the threshold to 300 workers. According to the annual survey of industries, this single numerical tweak quietly exempts more than 90% of India's industrial establishment from regularity scrutiny, effectively handing employers the freedom to retrench workers at will. No permission, no justification, no awkward conversation with the state. To soften this blow, the code introduces a consolation price dressed up as a reform. Section 83 creates a reskilling fund, compelling employers to deposit wages equivalent to 15 days for every retrenched worker. This is presented as a bridge to future employability. Trade unions see it differently, as a one-time check attempting to replace the idea of long-term job security itself. The promise of stable employment is swapped for a brief training allowance, as though insecurity can be trained away. Job stability is diluted further through Section 2O, which gives the statutory legitimacy to fixed term employment. Employers are now free to hire workers for fixed duration for any kind of work, including tasks that are permanent and perennial in nature. Contracts can be renewed endlessly, creating a revolving door of employment where workers remain temporary forever, while the workers remain subordinately permanent. But here's my question: why exactly they are even going to renew the contracts? I don't think so. People are going to renew the contract because the freshers are going to be cheaper. But if I'm going to take somebody experienced, especially in these jobs where I don't need anybody with experience and the jobs are very much mechanical and manual, I don't want anybody to experience, and the freshers are going to do the job, fair enough job they will be able to do. So for in those circumstances, I really doubt any employer is ever going to renew the contracts. So that's another loophole in these laws, guys. And conciliations begins the moment a strike notice is received. Since the state has the power to prolong conciliation indefinitely, the legal space for lawful strike shrinks to near extinction, and this and to this the raising of the threshold for mandatory standing orders from 100 to 300 workers and smaller establishments are effectively relieved of codified services and service conditions. The factory floor remains actively, but the rule of the law quietly exists through the back door. By merging 9 laws, including the EPF Act, this code arrives with the fanfare and finally notices the gig workers, like a parent who suddenly realizes the child has been living in the house all along. Section 2 subclause 35 formally recognizes gig workers and platform workers, but stops just short of calling them employees. That missing word does all the damage, because without it, the companies like Uber or Zomato are neatly absolved of responsibilities such as provident fund contribution or long-term social security. Instead, the code offers a welfare funded by 1 to 2% levy on the aggregated annual turnover. It sounds generous until you realize that this is right, but a charity box. Social security here is not enforceable, it is discretionary. Workers are not entitled to protection, they are merely beneficiary of a cess. Right demands accountability. Welfare funds demands gratitude. Ask yourself, would you rather have a legal claim or a collection plate? The discomfort deepens when Section 142, which mandates Aadhaar based registration, on paper, this ensures efficiency. On the ground, where migrant workers struggle, the mismatched names, broken biometrics, unstable documentation, it risks becoming a digital gatekeeper. If your fingerprint doesn't scan, do your right vanish too? Recognition without enforceability, welfare without entitlement, technology without accessibility. This is inclusion that looks progressive but feels conditional. By replacing 13 laws, this code redraws the map of workplace safety. Section 2, subclause W redefines the count as factory by raising the worker threshold from 20 to 20, from 10 to 20 where power is used, and from 20 to 40 where it is not. On paper, it is efficiency. In reality, thousands of small units simply vanish from regulation. These are often the very spaces where safety is weakest and accidents most frequent. When the law looks away who is watching the workers, the same logic follows the contract labor. The court now applies only to contract employing 50 or more workers, up to 20. The message is clear: stay small, stay invisible. Employers are encouraged so to fragment their workforce, slice one operation into many, and neatly step aside compliance. Safety here becomes a number game rather than a human concern. Working hours tells a similar story. The 8-hour day survives on paper, but the introduction of spread over time, left conveniently to further rules, creates elastic limits. With longer breaks inserted, states could legally stretch work days to 12 hours. Is exhaustion being repackaged as flexibility? And when Section 128 allows governments to exempt any establishment through a mere notification, even this diluted protection can be switched off at will. Safety laws, once the backbone of labor protection, now become with an asterisk, valid unless withdrawn. The notification didn't arrive quietly, it landed like a firecracker. Trade unions and farmers groups rushed to the streets not because they enjoy protest selfies, but because they sensed something foundational had shifted. Their anger rests on three sharp objections, each cutting deeper than the last. First, the question legitimacy itself. Laws passed with minimal debate and rolled out with consideration. The Indian Labour Conference are not just procedurally sloppy, they arguably numb their nose at ILO convention. If democracy is about discussion, can silence count as consent? Second comes the heart of the fear, power. By curbing strikes, weakening standing orders, and making job security, the courts hollow out collective bargaining. Unions say under the Industrial Relations Code 2020, a trade union must command at least 51% of workers to become the sole negotiating union. The threshold has been lowered from the 75% proposed earlier, which sounds generous until you try achieving it in a real workplace. In large establishments, reaching 51% union membership, it is not collective strength, it is an administrative miracle. This requirement weakens bargaining by making unity conditional. Negotiating privilege Negotiations becomes a privilege, not a right. More cleverly, the system rewards employers who encourage multiple small unions, ensuring that no single union ever crosses the line. Divide and rule, updated for the ages of committee. Where several unions exist, the negotiating council is presented as democratic. In reality, it is a buffet. Your employer can choose whom to engage with, favoring the agreeable and sidelining the inconvenient. Militant unions are isolated, compliant ones are amplified. Workers' representations fragments, and power quietly shifts. The law does not ban collective bargaining, it simply redesigns it so that it really works in the workers' favor. The provisions on working hours shows how protection can be redesigned to look kind while working harder than ever. Under the Factories Act of 1948, the rule was simple: no more than 9 hours a day or 48 hours a week. Without overtime, it drew a clearer line between worker and wear. The Occupational Safety Health Code Working Conditional Code 2020 keeps the 48 hours weekly limit but loosens everything else. With standardization, flexible rostering, and expanded overtime provisions, the law quietly opens the door to our work days. On the paper, the limits remains intact. On the body, it does not. 12 hours of labor, even when paid at overtime rates, drains health, fractures family life, and erodes dignity in a way that weekly arithmetic cannot capture. The code sells this as flexibility that benefits everyone. Employers meets production demands, workers earn more. In reality, pressure replaces choice. Fixed term and contract workers already living on the renewals will not refuse extended working hours. The freedom to decline becomes theoretical. The option to say no disappears quietly. What is presented as flexibility becomes endurance, and endurance becomes the price of staying employed. So, after concluding the four codes, you are going to realize that the real question is enforcement. Because rights without access are aspirationals, not protections. Will inspections happen? Will workers know their rights? Will violations be punished? Or be compliance remains a checkbox for employers and a rumors for workers? Upliftment doesn't come from announcement, it comes from accountability. So, is the labor law reform 2025 good or bad? The honest answer is uncomfortable. It is well intentioned, it is unevenly designed, it simplifies systems for the state and employers but demands awareness and courage from workers who often have neither. From reform without support structures risk becoming reforms only on for those already secure. This reform is not one story, it is two running parallel. One speaks the language of universality, the other operates through the exemptions. The core promise inclusions but distributes it unevenly. They simplify governance for the state compliance for employers and paperwork for courts. Whether the simplify life for workers depends entirely on the enforcements, and the enforcement in India is never automatic. It is a choice. If you believe labor law should protect the weakest, share this. If you think efficiency is justice, argue below. And if you are still undecided, that's the most honest position of all. Thank you for listening. Subscribe for more judicial opinions that reads the footnotes, not just the headlines. And this is me, Abhilasha Sharma, your host. And thank you so much for listening, guys.